Good to go? All right. So Genesis chapter 30. Message today is just the building up of Jacob's house, part 2. As uninspiring as that title may be, I trust the content of the message will be a little more compelling. So this is where we are, Genesis chapter 30, verses 25 down to the end. I'd like to go ahead and begin with prayer. Well, I suppose my objectives today are most immediately to explain this text, right? What's going on. Secondly, there are a couple connections with other events in Scripture that I will make that's almost in passing, but it is significant when you see it. And then lastly, and the main hope is to sort of instill in you a greater confidence in God and in His control of all things, His faithfulness to fulfill all that He has promised us. So that's where we are going. So let's begin then just with reading the Scripture. Genesis chapter 30, verses 25 through 43. As soon as Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away, that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served you, that I may go. For you know the service that I have given you." But Laban said to him, "If I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages, and I will give it." And Jacob said to him, "You yourself know how I have served you, and how your livestock has fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly. And the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. But now, when shall I provide for my own household also?" He said, "What shall I give you?" Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything, if you will do this for me. I will again pasture your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep and every black lamb, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and they shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later, when you come to look into my wages with you. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted stolen." Laban said, "Good, let it be as you have said." But that day he, or Laban, removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob pastured the rest of Laban's flock. Well, then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks. He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is, the watering places where the flocks came to drink. And since they bred when they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the sticks, and so the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob separated the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban. He put his own droves apart and did not put them with Laban's flock. Whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks in the troughs before the eyes of the flock, that they might breed among the sticks. But for the feebler of the flock, he would not lay them there. So the feebler would be Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man increased greatly, and had large flocks, female servants, and male servants, and camels, and donkeys. All right, so I said, or titling this, The Building Up of Jacob's House, Part 2. Now, Part 1 was the building up of his house in terms of family. And we saw from last time that was fraught with problems. There were issues all the way through as that was happening. And there are some issues here as well, the building up of his house. Now he's building up in terms of wealth. but God is still faithfully building up His house. By way of introduction, I want to remind us of the setting here briefly for Jacob, and then I want to talk about the structure of this text. I think it'll be helpful for us, and then we'll dive right in. Remember again here, Jacob has been a liar and a deceiver and a supplanter of the blessings had by others since his birth. He has continually lived as an antagonist in almost every relationship that he has, until one day God met with him early on in his flight for his life away from his legitimately enraged brother. So he's always been in this antagonistic position. His father somehow could see through all of that and knew that between his two sons, Jacob was the one to whom all of Abraham's blessings would pass. And so Jacob received his father's blessing of Abraham, along with instructions to go find a wife from his uncle's house. Now God Himself met with him in a vision to assure him that these blessings of Abraham would in fact be his, and that God would be with him and work with him to faithfully bring about the fulfillment of the promises made to Abraham. The deceiver, Jacob, is left from that encounter with awe and wonder at the glory and the goodness of God to him, and he determines then to make Yahweh his God and vows to establish a place of worship to God at the very place of this vision, if the Lord would bless him as promised, and if the Lord would return him safely to that location. So he'll go on with God, but if God brings him back here safely, then he will establish this place of worship. So Jacob sets out on his journey, and everything's very much in question. How will God care for him? Will Jacob make it back? And what condition will he make it back? These are the questions we have. Of course, we know, who have been reading through Genesis already, that God will faithfully provide for him, but Jacob doesn't necessarily know it yet. So he arrives quickly in Padan Aram and immediately comes to the right place where he meets Rachel. He is overcome with the kind and controlling hand of God that he's seeing in his life and leading him in this way. He rejoices with Laban's family at this reunion and at his arrival. After 1 month, Laban feels that since Jacob continues to stick around, he ought to be paying him for whatever he can do to help. And so he hires Jacob as a shepherd. Jacob, however, names his own wages. He will serve for 7 years to marry Laban's younger daughter, Rachel. These 7 years seem to him, we're told, to be a very few short days due to his love for Rachel. When the wedding time arrives, Laban switches the deal, unknown to Jacob, and gives Leah as a wife instead, right? Jacob was a deceiver, but Laban is a deceiver of a deceiver, right? He's kind of one-ups him. And I think I had titled that message, or one of the messages around there, Jacob meets his match, right? The deceiver is deceived. So you've got Laban, who is Jacob is a deceiver, but Laban is a deceiver of a deceiver. So he one-ups him. 1 week later, Jacob marries Rachel because he was so ill-contented with Leah. Rachel is the one he wanted. In agreement, though, he has to work for another 7 years for Laban. Laban is getting lots of labor out of this man. Those 7 years are filled with something of an arms race between these two women, these two sisters, these two wives that Jacob has. They are seeking to gain security and affection for themselves by providing male heirs for Jacob. Once Rachel finally has a child, the wife that he loves, Jacob decides it's time to be thinking about returning to Canaan and establishing his family in the promised land to he and his descendants. That's very telling that he had all these kids and he never thought, I'm getting a family here. We're getting something established. I need to go back home. But once the wife that he loved, she finally had a child, and he thought, now we've got something of my own. We've got something here to build on. Let's go back home. It really says a lot about the family dynamics in Jacob's home and the future resentment that Joseph's brothers have for him. This began, the favoritism, or their lack of being in their father's favor, began before Joseph was even born. Like, they were just not really highly regarded, even before Joseph was born. Now that Joseph's born, now suddenly their father Jacob wants to begin to establish something for the family and set apart from Laban. So this is where the story picks up today. But before we just dive in, I said I wanted to talk briefly about the structure of this passage. It can very easily be divided into two sections. The first section, this is very rare. The first section of the story is nothing but dialogue, talking back and forth. The second half, there is no dialogue, only narration about what happened. The first half is all about Jacob and Laban having this conversation and coming to an agreement about the wages, what the wages will be and how this will work. And the second half is all about how both guys kind of double-crossed the agreement and tried to work it out in such a way that was better for them at the expense of the other. And then how how it actually turned out. So that's the whole second half. So they kind of have two separate halves. So verses 25 through 34 is just establishing again this arrangement between Jacob and Laban, which then sets up sets the scene for how the narrative reporting will work in the later half. That second half, that narrative report about what happens, just explains how that previous arrangement in the first section actually worked out in practice and the result that it brought about. So in this respect, the whole text is very, very plainly and directly laid out. We don't need to get overly complicated and wonder about certain things. It's just very direct in its telling, very straightforward. But in order to understand all of this, I think fully, we will have to, at some point, dip into chapter 31 and read some material there. And the light that it gives, I think, is helpful for our interpretation as to what's happening in Genesis chapter 30. So with that said, let's just jump in here, Genesis chapter 30, verse 25, and consider this. Now this first section, you could summarize it this way. Jacob is wishing to return to the promised land. He realizes on his side that, for his end, that aside from his two wives, he has little else to show for his 14 years of labor and almost no wealth with which to sustain his family. And so he and Laban agree that he will serve for longer in exchange for all of the off-colored and typically less desirable animals in Laban's flock and whatever Jacob can make from that while he's serving Laban. So that's kind of a summary. Let me flesh that out and look at and explain that from the text. So these first several verses, verses 25 through 34, not only are they all dialogue, but they take place in kind of three rounds of dialogue, you might say. Jacob speaks, Laban responds. Jacob speaks, Laban responds. Jacob speaks, Laban responds. So that's another something you have here. And so we can just look at it in that way. So let me just look at this first little bit. So we read in 25 through 28 that Jacob wished to leave for the promised land with his women and children. And that's all he says. He doesn't ask for money. He just wants to leave. But then Laban desired for him to stay, since God was blessing Laban on account of Jacob. So let's just look at that, verses 25 through 28. As soon as Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go, for you know the service that I have given you." End quote. No talk there about, "and pay me." I think it probably was assumed, that Laban would give him something. He would send him away. "I'm going to give you," yes. He'd already been given these wives and his children. What do you mean, give me my wives and my children? I think it's shorthand for something like, send us away. Give us a proper send-off. He says, well, I'll give them to you, but, right? But Laban, in contrast to what he had proposed, said to him, "If I found favor in your sight," which means something like, "Please hear me out on this, and be disposed to what I want to say. Do me a favor. I'll do that for you, but please listen, hear me out on this, and let's work it out in this other way." This is a phrase that usually is said from a lesser to a greater. It's very unusual for Jacob or for Laban to say it to Jacob. Usually you'd have someone who's in a lower position say, "If I found favor in your sight." Right? Moses, we find, saying this to the Lord, "If I found favor in your sight." And it's typically used that way. But here it's from the greater to the lesser. It's not usually done this way, but all the more reason to see that Laban is really kind of laying it on thick here. If I found favor in your sight, he says, I've learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages, and I will give it. Now there's this phrase, I've learned by divination. Some of you, well, most of you will have a footnote in the text that might really confuse you. If you look in your Bible, it says, I have learned by divination, and a footnote, or I have become rich. And it's like, what? Did you learn by divination, or did you become rich? Well, it's a very slight change or distinction in the original language. It could mean one or the other. I mean, it's not that this one phrase can mean either or. It's just that there's not much difference. And so some translations have this. The other thing is, to me, it doesn't seem like he would have learned by divination. Typically, when you learn things by divination, you're foretelling the future. You're finding things out in that way. And this just doesn't seem to be that case. He's discerning a fact about what's happened for the last 14 years. And so a lot of commentators will just say, instead of learned by divination, I have discerned. I've determined after careful consideration and living with you for these 14 years, I've come to a conclusion. Well, whatever it may be. So that's kind of a strange interpretation of I've learned by divination. And the other one is a little bit different of a textual issue. I have become rich. I don't know which one you want to take. I've become rich seems to flow very natural. I've learned by divination. If it means something like I've just discerned is fine too. But regardless, what he's saying, look, if I found favor in your sight, look, God has really been blessing me, and I've become wealthy as a result of that because of you. It's not just that God is doing this for me. I've realized that it's really God's hand is on you. And everywhere you are going, God is blessing you. Everywhere you turn, I prosper. This sounds like Joseph in Egypt, doesn't it? I mean, everywhere he goes, whatever's given under his authority, it just blossoms and prospers. Much like Daniel later. So this is what we see. And Laban recognizes it. And because of this, it's like Jacob's a nice pet to have around. He's a nice worker to have around. If you have someone around as an employee that everything you give them to do succeeds wildly, and now they say, hey, I want to go on and do my own thing, it's like, tell you what, how about you name your price? Whatever it is you want, you name it and I'll give it to you. Which is kind of a funny position to be in. I mean, Laban has to acknowledge the only reason I have anything and things are going well is because of you. And if you stick around, I'll pay you. I'll let you skim off the top of all the good that's coming to me because of you. It's rather odd, you know. But this is the position he's in. And this is what he's proposing. Name your wages, right? Name your wages, and I will give it, verse 28. So then the next cycle, Jacob does name them. Jacob complains in a sense that God has been blessing Laban abundantly, but that he personally has received zero benefit from that fact. And so Laban then agrees to pay him new wages. All right, you tell me, what is it you want? So let's read there. So verse 29, Jacob said to him, you yourself know that how I have served you and how your livestock has fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. But now, when shall I provide for my own household also? And he said, what shall I give you? It's important to notice what Jacob is beginning to propose. He's kind of setting the context here. He's saying, look, the whole time I've been here, you've seen the way I have faithfully served you. Everything has prospered. I've been honest with you. Everything's gone well. But here I've been spending all my time doing that. When am I going to have time to provide for my own family? So he's kind of setting it up like, let me do both. Right? Let me do both. And so, Laban just says, kind of saying, well, okay, you're right. What do you propose? Essentially, what shall I give you? And so then the third exchange here. Jacob sets forth a plan to work for the off-colored animals of the flock, and Laban agrees. So here we have in verse 31, also the second half of it. Verse 31. He said, not the second half, just the beginning. He said, the second half. Jacob said, you shall not give me anything if you will do this for me. I will again pasture your flock and keep it. Right? I'll do all of that. But what else? With this one caveat. Let me what? Let me pass through all of your flock today. Right now, let me go through your flock, and I will separate, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep and every black lamb, and the spotted and speckled among the goats. And they shall be my wages. So what I want to do is I want to start out taking all the undesirables, right? Give me those. I'll separate those, and I'll keep those. I'll shepherd both flocks. Your flock, all the all-white sheep and the black goats, and we'll take them, and I will faithfully shepherd them. At the same time, I will have these others that are less desirable, and I'll shepherd them. And whatever I get out of them, those will be my wages. And what does Laban say? Let's continue. So, my honesty will answer for me later. This is funny coming from Jacob, right? I mean, we'll determine how fair I've been in all this later when we look at, see how honest I am. My own integrity will answer for me later. When you come to look into my wages with you, you say, well, how's he been doing? And you'll see, and anyone in my flock, the flocks that I have for myself, anything that is not speckled and spotted among the goats, anything that's not black among the lambs, if it's found with me, it shall be counted stolen. So I will not, at the end of the time, however long it is, I will only keep for myself those that remain spotted and speckled. So if spotted and speckled lambs produce a white lamb, that goes to you. I don't get to keep it. You get all of the preferred animals, right? All the white lambs and the black goats, they're all for you. Everything that you don't really care for anyway now, that you gets less on the market or whatever, I'll have, and I'll only get those things. So Laban's thinking, this sounds pretty good. If Jacob is still going to be in charge of everything and God's going to bless it all, then let him have the less desirable stuff. No big deal. Sounds like a good plan. So Laban said, good, let it be as you have said. I like this idea. It's like you have that employee who's everything's succeeding, and there's one part of your business that he does really well, but it really is not the profitable side of the business. Like you've been thinking for a long time, I wish I could kind of split that off and not have that part of the business and just have this one that's really profitable. And then that employee comes and says, hey, what do you think if for my wages you don't pay me anything out of the profitable stuff, and you just give me the unprofitable part of the business, and I'll still run the profitable stuff and that'll do well, and then the unprofitable part of the business, I'll just get whatever money that makes. You would say, what? Good. Just what he says. Let it be as you have said. We've never figured out how to make money on that part of things. You can have it. And this is kind of what happens here. In this part of the world, the sheep are normally white and the goats are normally black. That's not that way everywhere, but that's typically what you find here. And so this is what he's taking, these things that are the less desirable. Now, let me just draw some things together here now that the dialogue is ended, before we move on to see how all this worked out in practice. Let me just make a few statements. Jacob is wanting to return for the promised land, but he knows he's not ready to do so, right? His house is not wealthy enough to make the journey safely and in such a way as to make a start in the land of promise. He needs more. It's not a good situation to travel with the family size that he has with as little material wealth as he has. And so he seeks to leverage his relationship with Laban, untrustworthy though Laban is, to try and secure a sufficient measure of wealth for his family to make the journey and make the start back in the promised land. Laban acknowledges that God's blessing has been upon him ever since Jacob began working for him, and that wherever Jacob turned, good things happened for Laban. Therefore, Laban does not want to let Jacob go, worried he might lose what he has gained and be left with the little that he had before, right? Jacob says, you didn't have hardly anything when I got here, now you've got an abundance. So Laban seeks to compel Jacob to stay for longer, but for an agreed upon wage. He did not offer to send him away with any of the wealth that he obtained by virtue of God's favor on Jacob. He didn't offer him any of that. He just says, well, from this point forward, you name your wage and we'll see what we can do. So Jacob, likely very aware of the selfishness of Laban, offers to shepherd the flocks of Laban for an indeterminate period of time. We don't know how long it'll be. We know it ended up being 6 years. It's quite a long time to try to build something, to leave. But it ended up being that long. But so he's very aware of how selfish Laban is. He offers, let me shepherd your flocks. Let me just start shepherding your flocks. But in doing so, all of the off-colored animals will belong to him, and all the ones that are colored in the more desirable and common way will belong to Laban. Jacob will keep them separated, and in this way he'll build his own flocks up while keeping careful watch also of Laban's flocks. It's a risky proposition, as flocks don't usually produce lots of off-colored offspring. And the more desirable traits typically belong to the common colored animals. But it's likely to meet with Laban's approval because of that, right? For that very reason. He's likely to say, okay, let's do it. So Laban agrees. They've struck a bargain on these terms, or so they both have led the other one to believe. You might say it that way. They're both kind of angling in here and posturing. Now, let's move on then to the narrative report, beginning in verse 35. Here we see Jacob seeking to outsmart and outmaneuver the cheating Laban. Jacob used very questionable breeding practices to produce these odd-colored animals for himself, and he succeeded. Now, what do we have here? Let's begin just to look at some of this. Look at the first thing that happens, verse 35. It's just crazy. But that very day, after they reach the agreement, you might say they shake on it, covenant together, this is what we'll do. Laban removed, before he the deal was, Jacob was supposed to go over and see the flock, and any of the flock that was speckled or spotted or off-colored, he would get to have them as his own. But before he gets to go see the flock, Laban says, sons, come here. Go to the flock and take out all the off-colored animals and get them out of here. 3 days journey, go. So this is what happens. So Jacob gets to the flock, to Laban's flock, and there are no off-colored animals. It's only the desirable ones. Well, good luck. And what a scoundrel Laban is. I mean, you can't imagine that after all that he's done and all the acknowledgement that God has blessed him because of Jacob, you'd think he'd try to be very kind to Jacob. That is not Laban. This guy's a cheat through and through. It's incredible. How double-crossed you would feel. Again, I mean, it's like, you got Leah again. It's crazy. He does it to you again. But that day Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in the charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob pastured the rest of Laban's flock. So he's going to get to keep all the striped and spotted and speckled and all the off-colored ones, but there are none of them. So as these animals breed, good luck. Good luck with that. So this is where we are. This was a good idea Laban had in terms of human cunning, right? Very crafty. Jacob's going to show up and be like, oh, what happened to all the, what do you mean? None are here, I guess. Should have chose better, Jacob. I mean, you named your wages. This is what's here. That's the luck of the draw, I guess, right? Sorry. This is the idea. But notice though, because he insists on this distance, it does provide Jacob with the opportunity to be unsupervised in the way he manages Laban's flock. And that itself is Laban's undoing in some ways, right? So Jacob decides, there's some impure motives here in Jacob's heart too. He's not going to just trust the Lord with this. He's like, okay, I will make sure that his flock is not injured and wounded or stolen by anyone but me, right? Kind of thing. It's like he's not going to injure them. If something's stolen, he'll repay it. He'll honor the terms of the agreement. If he has any of the favorably colored animals, those will be belonging to Laban. But he is going to do everything he can to make sure that all the strong and the desirable and the multitude of this flock belong to him and not to Laban. It's not like we're just going to faithfully, he's no longer shepherding Laban's flock in Laban's interest and then his portion of the flock in his interest. He's shepherding both flocks in his own interest without the interest of Laban with any consideration of that. He's only looking out for Laban insofar as he's not willing to technically violate the terms of the contract. That's it. And this is one where you like to go back at times and wish you hadn't signed the document or wish you'd read page 14, paragraph 6, sentence B a little more carefully, right? This is the way it is. And this is in the fine print, right? Well, I didn't say I had to shepherd them in your interest. It's not technically required of me. And this is the way Jacob responds. He diligently works to increase his flock in spite of Laban's dishonesty. That's good, hard work, that's great. But he uses pretty questionable practices. Not only are they hard to understand a little bit, but they're also questionable in terms of whether they were morally right for him to go about it that way. So he tries to produce these animals for himself and not really for Laban. So what do we have? Let's look at that. Verses 37 through 41. This is the details that get rather confusing. Then Jacob took fresh sticks, or your version might say green sticks, meaning fresh, right? I mean, trees that are fresh, we call them green, like the bark underneath is green a little bit, right? The wood is still white, but right underneath the bark is green. And this is what it said. He took green sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees. And I don't know much about these trees. I can tell you a little bit about poplar and very little about almond, and I don't even know what a plane tree is. So that's not important. But nonetheless, he takes these branches and he peels white streaks in them, right? He makes this little flint knife or his metal knife, whatever he's got, and he cuts strips in this and makes it, like he's whittling down, and he makes these things spotted and speckled and striped, and that's what these sticks look like now. He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is, the watering places where the flocks came to drink. So you have, you get rain come in, and what do you do with all this rainwater? Well, you want to channel it. It's generally dry out there, so the water just kind of runs on the surface of the ground. So if you can set up channels, or if you have a well, like a cistern, that's even better. But if you don't have a cistern, you can set up channels where when the waters come, it fills into these troughs, and the animals come down and they get their water there, and they can all kind of line up and drink all at once. It's better than just a watering hole. And so this is where they're at. Whether these troughs are naturally occurring or man-made is not really important for us, but they are there. And what does he do? He goes and he takes these sticks that he's prepared and he sets them in those troughs where the flocks come to drink. And since they bred when they came to drink, they'd come there and they're grazing and they're happy, and if they're in heat, then it's time, and this is where they would bring them all together, and that's where the mating would occur. So at the time where they are, at the place where they are mating, he sets these sticks there in front of them. The flocks bred in front of the sticks, and so the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. Right? I want to emphasize now, for a point made later, the the word so is nowhere found in the, there's no reason to translate anything like that. And thus, or and therefore, and so, and as a result. The text doesn't tell us that at all. The text tells us the flocks bred in front of the sticks, and the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. It just tells you this is what he did, and then this is what happened. The Bible does not make this causal connection for you here. That's important for what we'll say later. Now, so then what happens? And Jacob separated, verse 40, the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban. He put his own droves apart and did not put them with Laban's flock. Whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks in the troughs before the eyes of the flock, that they might breed among the sticks. But for the feebler of the flock, he would not lay them there, so the feebler would be Laban's and the stronger Jacob's. What? Right, so I'm not exactly sure, even after all the commentaries I've read and everything, exactly how to understand verse 40. And Jacob separated the lambs. I think that's clear. The lambs that were his, right? He separated them and set the faces of the flocks, so you face them a certain way. Is this while they're breeding? Toward the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban. It seems like they couldn't see the flock of Laban. They were 3 days' journey apart, right? They were way away. Unless he means here the flock of Laban, just that all of it originally was Laban's. But that's strange because it says in the next phrase, he put his own droves apart. So it seems like he, even Laban's flock, those sheep that belonged to Laban, Jacob, what did he do when he put them down for pasture or he, put them in a pen or something? He tried as best he could to even face them so that even the way they faced was towards the speckled and the off-colored ones of Laban. So that all they saw when they bred was the striped and the spotted and all that on the sticks. These are white, these are just all white lambs, right? They see all that, and then when they're not even mating, they just look in the direction of Laban's that are that way. It's right? And so what happens is he gets spotted and speckled and off-colored sheep. That's what happens. Not necessarily the result, but that is what happens. And the ones that breed that way, he takes them and gets them out of there, so there's no way they are going to be breeding with the good-colored ones. These are only going to breed together with other ones that are spotted and off-colored. He does that, and then also he's selective about it. So there's generally like when it's kind of time, it's that time of the year, most of these animals are breeding, that's one thing. But at any time, when the stronger come, when they are breeding, he makes sure wherever they are, whatever's going on, whatever troughs they are, he makes sure these sticks that are spotted and speckled and striped get in front of them. And they are seeing that they might breed. He does that because he wants them to breed among those sticks. But for the weaker ones, he sees these ones that are a little weaker, he doesn't care about them. And if he has to make sure that Laban is still getting, they're still producing good colored animals. And so he doesn't worry about it when it's the weaker ones, and he lets them do their thing. He doesn't try to intervene or have an effect on what young they would produce. For the feebler of the flock, he would not lay them there. And so the feebler would be Laban. His thinking was the feebler would be Laban's and the stronger would be Jacob's. And that was the plan. Now, if I told you that was my plan, you would say, good luck. Right? Good luck. Thus, the man increased greatly and had large flocks, female servants and male servants and camels and donkeys. I mean, he prospered. This is unbelievable. Now, let me explain these practices. And I have been back and forth my entire Christian life about what to make of this text. And I can honestly tell you, it wasn't until last night about 10:30 at night that I said, that's it. I think I got it. So I'm going to just propose it to you, telling you, I think I got it, and you do with it what you want. So at root, I think we can't get away from this. At root of his determination here, his practices, is his belief that whatever it is these animals see, if they see it vividly, they will produce offspring that resembles what they see in terms of what they look like. Now, this isn't peculiar to Jacob. There's lots of things you can read in ancient history where people will say these kinds of things. Don't forget, this is before modern genetics and all this, all these scientific things have been done. This is just people trying to figure out why things are the way they are. And it seems to be this way. This is what a lot of people were believing. They were acting in this way. So, but for Jacob, he's got to do a lot of work to make sure that it's a vivid image, that it must be seen during mating. Was another thing. When they breed, it's got to be seen during mating, or at least at time of conception. This is going to have a more pronounced effect. It's more likely to succeed, at least, if they're seeing this while they mate. Evidently, it's not. He doesn't think it's only when they mate, because even when they're not mating, he's making sure that they're looking in the direction even of Laban's that are off-colored. That's a kind of an odd thing. But he's putting so much into this. What are they looking at? What are they seeing? What's captivating their mind? What do sheep think about? Well, I hope it's spotted and speckled, whatever it is, and they'll produce spotted and speckled. And this is the idea. This is the root, at root of his actions here. Knowing that only the off-colored or multicolored animals would belong to him, Jacob cared for the normal-colored animals as he had to, but he did everything he knew how to do to ensure that the animals produced off-colored offspring. So what does he do? The first thing, in order to get any off-colored at all, and second, to ensure that the animals that were the strongest and best produced off-colored descendants, he has to enact all of this stuff. What are we to make of this? Do these animals really produce off-colored descendants as a result of what they see when they mate? No, they do not. Right? They don't. That's not how it works. But Jacob is going about it that way. Right? And thankfully the text doesn't say, and because he did this, this is what happened. The text just tells us this is what he did, and then also this is what happened. I wanted to think of it this way. This was what helped me come to grips with this. I'll give two illustrations of it. But consider perhaps if we told a story about a farmer who was in desperate need of crop, vital to his existence and the existence of his family. He sought the Lord's help, pleaded his case to God about having been taken advantage of by the local farmers and the villagers who stole things or whatever, or ruined his crops due to persecution or hatred. And then he went about his work, after he prayed to God about it, he went about his work using every possible advantage to make sure that he had the crop. It is perhaps maybe 500 years ago, and much of the knowledge available to us now about his plants are not available to him. We know more about his plants than he does. We find him practicing very diligently and in good faith those things that he believes will produce a good crop. We might look at some of his methods and laugh at them. I mean, as someone who has learned much about gardening over the last couple of years due to YouTube, I can tell you that for every good video, there's a dozen that are just ridiculous in what they recommend, right? If you do this, then you'll get this. It's like, what are they talking about? And so here this farmer is practicing these methods. We look at some of them, we laugh, we wonder how he could believe such things. But for his part, he's deadly earnest about his efforts. If they are successful, we know it's not due to his method. Like he was doing it as diligently as he could, and we know if he succeeds, it's not because of that particular thing. He was just doing all that he could. It's rather, if they succeed, it's God's good intention toward him. Or consider another one. There was a time when the greatest and brightest of our physicians were about the practice of bloodletting, right? and killed a number of our presidents as a result. But think of this. I mean, we know today the way the body functions, like your entire immune system is greatly compromised if you don't have the blood that you need. We were talking about transferring plasma to people. I mean, this stuff is in blood. We need this stuff. And so you're really sick. What are we going to do? Their idea was we're going to let out all that bad blood that's in you and get rid of it. Well, it's not. It's the thing keeping you alive. But they're going to get rid of it. And some people, even under the care of those physicians, still got better. You think, how? Like it had nothing to do with, they were working in the opposite direction they should have been working in. But sometimes their patients got better. And it wasn't just like a rare thing. Obviously, they got better enough of the time that people thought this was one of the things that would be a good thing to do. It wasn't just, I did it and they lived. It was like, I did it on 8 people and 6 of them recovered. It's like, it's strange. Why? There's no real connection there. It's just coincidence, but it becomes common practice. And so you wouldn't look at that physician if he was prayerful and earnest about all that he did. You wouldn't say, this guy is a total fool. What superstition, what a stupid thing. You wouldn't say that. You'd say he's practicing modern medicine. The greatest medicine that is available, he's practicing. He's doing all that he can. I mean, it's similar to you. You go to a physician to get advice about things, and they maybe prescribe certain drugs. Or let's take it this way. Let's say, back when some of our parents were pregnant, they go to the doctor and they say, they don't ask them, do you smoke? They say, don't worry, this has no effect. It's perfectly fine. Keep smoking. In fact, if you'd be drinking a little more alcohol, probably be better for your pregnancy. That was commonly said. And now we know this is like exactly the opposite. But you don't look at those people and think it's all superstitious. It wasn't that way. They didn't know it, but they had hunches. Like, I think this is probably the case. And so here Jacob is doing everything that he can to ensure that he succeeds, that he has much, that he prospers. He's doing everything possible. And I think these details are in there, and the story is in there to show you he was diligent. He had these flocks, and every time they went to the trough, what did he do? Some might breed here. So what are we going to do? He'd make an effort to make sure he's got fresh branches. Think of this. We're talking about a period of like at least 6 years. It's not as though one day he made these branches and put the sticks there and then he never had to do it again. He's got to keep them fresh. This is a lot of work. Paying careful attention to what sheep are breeding when and where they are, and making sure that in front of them at that time. Even when they're not breeding, when they're just lounging around and grazing, or they're put to pasture, making sure they're all faced a certain way. This is occupying this guy's every thought. All of his time is spent how to make sure that these animals produce spotted and speckled and off-colored so that I get my wages. Because he's not going to give me anything. Now, he shouldn't have been so singly absorbed, right? So focused on just one thing. He should have been looking out for Laban's flock the same way he did before. And then when they happened to produce some spotted and speckled, to say, oh, great, I'll take care of these too. That's what he should have done. He didn't. But this text is here, these details are here, I believe, to emphasize to us the way that Jacob went about things and the intensity with which he pursued his objective. Again, it's helpful to notice that at no point does the Bible contribute the success he has to the spotted branches laid in the troughs. Rather, it merely relates his efforts and it relates the outcome. Now, in the next chapter, which we'll get into here in a little bit, we will learn a bit more about all of this and what was going on. Now, it may also be helpful in this, in thinking about this, to think about the mandrakes mentioned earlier in the chapter. You remember? The love fruit, or the fruit of frutility, right? So you get yourself a mandrake, and that's fertility fruit. That's the wives' tale, right? That's the idea. That's the home remedy, right? Is if you're having trouble with infertility, have 2 mandrakes every day, kind of thing, right? I mean, then you'll get pregnant. This is the idea. Now, you could try to read Genesis chapter 30 about these mandrakes and think, oh, they worked. The Bible says they worked. The one who had the mandrakes, Leah got these mandrakes. She gave some of them to Rachel. She kept the rest for herself. And she got pregnant. They worked, mandrakes. And the one she gave mandrakes to later on eventually got pregnant. So maybe the Bible's saying mandrakes not only have an immediate effect, but they, even if you have mandrakes, for years to come, you are more likely to get pregnant. The Bible tells us in this text that mandrakes cures lifelong infertility. No, it doesn't say that at all. It just gives you a detail. And in fact, this detail is given to show us how bad the competition had got, how much they were struggling and clawing and fighting to try to get another heir for Jacob and to gain his affections and to get the security in the future of having a male heir. They were after that. The Bible isn't commending to us the practice of eating mandrakes or telling us that mandrakes will get you pregnant. But it's telling a story about people who operated in the belief that mandrakes might have that effect. Similarly, I think the Bible is here relating a story about what Jacob did, because Jacob was operating with a worldview where this might, in fact, be a way to secure. It's like, I'm doing everything I can. What else could I do? Well, I've heard it told, right, that this can have an impact. So he does it. And I would submit to you that you have in times in your life acted in the same way. I mean, you've done something that you can't really explain, but you heard somebody say this and you're just going to try it. It would be wrong for me to say, where's your faith in God? You would say, I do trust the Lord, but I also feel like it's part of my responsibility to do all that I can to secure this. So similarly with Jacob, it's wrong to say he's believing in some kind of magic or whatever. It's not that. We see that he's acting out of selfish motives here, but I also think, there's an appeal to God in that he's being taken advantage of. He's been done wrong. He's not pure in his response, but he is generally looking to God, even if he is taking maybe too selfish of an interest in the way he is shepherding these flocks. But on his part, he's doing all that he can to make sure that he comes out well in this situation, that he's not robbed again by Laban. So, the description of Jacob's methods in this text do not rise to the level of recommendation, right? But rather serve to demonstrate the lengths to which Jacob was going to overcome the deception of Laban, and rather to bring about a strong and vital flock for himself over time. And we see the success of it. Verse 43, thus, right, having done all that he could with the outcomes that he was getting, being successful as he was, Jacob increased greatly. Thus the man increased greatly and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. I said we're going to talk a little bit about the fulfillment of all that God had promised. There's a word used in this verse. Thus the man increased greatly. It's the same word used elsewhere for teemed. Right? We have that like in Genesis, the sea teemed with fish. It's this word. It means to kind of overflow the boundaries with productivity, right? Or with your increase. Whatever it is that is increasing, it's just going beyond the measure even. Now, there's one other place where this was used in Jacob's story. In Genesis chapter 28, the Lord promised him, your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad. You shall teem. You shall teem abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and in you and in your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. You see, God is beginning, you see this happening. It's being fulfilled. He's got all these offspring now, and now in terms of even just his wealth, he's just bursting at the seams, just like God said he would. It sounds so similar to a description of Abraham in Genesis 12. Let me read for you again what we just read in verse 43 of Jacob. Thus the man increased greatly and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Now here's Abraham coming out of Egypt. It says, and for her sake he dealt well with Abram, and he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. This is very similar. The only thing not mentioned the same is oxen. And there's no reason to think Jacob didn't get oxen in time. But so you see the fulfillment here of this blessing is passed on, and God is building up the house of Jacob. Now, just to add some insight to things by looking at chapter 31 a little bit. I don't want to give a full explanation of these verses in chapter 31. I just want to bring out some points. Let's begin reading, chapter 31. Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has gained all his wealth. And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. So let's get all this has happened for these 6 years. Jacob gets word, hey, Laban's not happy with you. And so he gets word of that, and then God, he's kind of getting afraid probably, and then God comes to him and says, hey, it's time to leave. Return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was, and said to them, I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before, but the God of my father has been with me these 6 years, you might say. He has been with me. You know that I have served your father, we're talking about now the full 20 years here, with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. Now, we didn't read about that in the last chapter. And we kind of read about it when he stole all the sheep to begin with, but we didn't necessarily read about this changing 10 times. Listen to this. Listen to him describe it. He says, but God did not permit him to harm me. If Laban said, the spotted shall be your wages, then all the flock bore spotted. And if he said, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore striped. So it's just like Laban comes around every now and again and sees all this. He's like, no. We're going to change it. This isn't right. I know that what we said is I get these ones that are not off-color. You get all the off-colored ones, but really the striped ones, I'll take the striped ones. And he takes them. And you only get the speckled ones, the ones that have spots. What? So, okay, well, guess what? So then Jacob's over there making all the branches are spotted now, right? And guess what? Spotted. And then tons of spotted. And then Laban comes by again. He says, I think I'll take the spotted instead. From now on, you can have the striped ones. I'll take the spotted. And it's just back and forth, and he's constantly dealing with this. And even though Laban is coming and trying to harm him in this way and take these things from him, God is working it out where he just continues to prosper. This is incredible. It's such a mark of God's absolute hand of blessing upon this man. He's continually being stolen from by Laban and cheated, and Laban can do nothing to him. If he said, the spotted shall be your wages, then all the flock bore spotted. If he said, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock bore striped. Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. In the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled. So he's relating, I had this dream. Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob. And I said, here I am. And he said, lift up your eyes and see, all the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, and mottled. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. Is doing. The dream comes like at the middle to the end of Jacob's practices in these 6 years. Laban has been doing all of this. The angel comes and gives him this dream where all the goats that are producing are all spotted and speckled and everything, and the angel comes and says, you see that? I'm behind that. There's a reason this is happening. I'm with you in this. Why? Not because I don't think you should have any concern for Laban, but because I see what Laban is doing for you, and my justice, the retribution I'm going to give to Laban who's trying to curse you, I will curse him. And the curse is no matter how many times he changes your wages, no matter how you set up the agreement, the ones that he says are for you, those are the only ones that are going to produce. It's just going to be constantly this way. He's going to get the feeble, you're going to get the strong. I've determined that's the way it's going to be. I'm behind it. I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now arise, go out from this land, and return to the land of your kindred. So this is what happened. This was the dream that was related. And so you can just see how the whole time this is happening, Laban's constantly changing his wages, but God's behind it, making sure that no matter what happens, Laban loses and Jacob wins in terms of the flock. It's not that Jacob heard from God that the sticks would be effective. It's nothing like that. Nowhere are we told that. We're just told that God says, basically, He's behind all this. It's been going on all this time. He's the reason this is working. And we would say the same thing. If we saw a man who was of this belief that he could do this and he did this and it worked, you would say, well, we know that doesn't work. And you might look for, maybe there's some other reason it's happening, but you know it wouldn't be because of what the guy tells you. At root of it, however it's explained, at root is God's behind this thing. God's made the determination to bless this man and to take away from this other man. And that's what happened here. And so I just kind of want to leave it at that and say, I don't, it's a practice that isn't in and of itself valid. It does demonstrate for us Jacob's desperation and his determination to make this a success. The Bible doesn't tell us this is why it worked. It just says that it happened. And then Jacob says, God has done this. God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. Jacob himself doesn't say, see, it was all those sticks. He says, God did this. He's not of his own lips discounting the sticks. He might continue that practice. I don't know. He might find in the future it's not as profitable. It doesn't work as well as it used to. Maybe there's something in the water in Padan Aram. I don't know what his ideas or his thinking would be, but at root he is also rightly attributing this to God. So, all that is done. Now let me just come to just conclusion, some applications we can make here as a result of what we see. Admittedly, it's an odd practice. It's an odd situation. None of us have ever, I don't think any of us have ever been around farms where people are serving in this way, in this capacity. Most we might have been around sheep, but that's kind of about it. So, the first takeaway here is verse 9 of chapter 31. God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. Just to acknowledge that. Like God is the one who raises men up and deposes men. He raises up kingdoms. He deposes kingdoms. God does this. God was at work behind the whole thing. These men are conniving and scheming back and forth and not looking out for the interest of one another in any way. But that didn't matter. It wasn't like, God said, God looked and said, this guy's got a better plan than this guy. It wasn't anything about that. Laban had all the power in here. Laban, he kept coming in and taking. Seems like all the advantage was with Laban, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter. God took away the livestock of your father and has given them to me. What else? Just not to miss that God was fulfilling the promises that He made to Jacob. He said He would have children. He had children. He said He would have a multitude of children. He had 12 so far, right? At this point. 11 boys and 1 girl. That's a ton. And think of this. Let me give you one verse here. Let's go to Genesis 28. This is really good. Verse 20. You remember Jacob is out there, this vision, God gives him this vision. But that night he had been leaving, traveling maybe for a couple of days, or maybe it was the first night. He'd been fleeing from his brother, right? From Esau, who wanted to kill him. And he's out there sleeping on a stone with pretty much nothing but a staff, as he says later, though he did have some oil of some kind, or at least he got a hold of some. But he's there, really nothing to speak of. And he says to God, verse 20, then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone, right, will be set up as a remembrance and all this, and he's going to establish a place of worship. So his hopes for how God would treat him is that God would keep him clothed and fed. If God would do that, I'll serve him all my days. He will be my God, and I will honor him. Well, God far surpassed his wildest hopes. He didn't say, if God will send me back with droves of flocks and sheep and donkeys and camels and wives and children, there's nothing like that. He just wants clothes and food. He doesn't want to be naked and starving. If God will keep me alive such that I get back here, then he'll be my God and I'll serve him all my days. His prospects for survival were not great. But look how he's fared. So just think of this now, beloved. Apply this to yourself. God not only fulfills the promises that he makes you, but he outperforms all of your hopes. He just outdoes them all. Jacob's in a place where he's kind of like, I think I can maybe venture out on God for this little thing. Maybe I'm hoping that I'll have enough food and clothing to survive, right? That's my hope. And God just bursts right past all that. And this guy's, he's prospering tremendously. So again, God not only fulfills his promises to Jacob, but he outperforms all of Jacob's hopes. What else? Not only did God fulfill his promise to Jacob, but he also made sure Laban got his just deserts. The flocks were taken from Laban. God took the flocks from Laban, it says. So you have, not only is God working in the situation to provide more than Jacob ever even hoped, but he's also working in the situation at the same time to mete out justice for the wrongdoer. This is incredible. God can be trusted to do more than we ask or think. He abundantly fulfills his promises. He exceeds our expectations. He metes out justice. Another application here. All of our ingenuity often is misguided. All of our ingenuity is often misguided. If you look at Jacob, he's working hard at things that don't work. Right? He's getting the sticks in there and making it look a certain way, and we know now that doesn't work at all. God blessed him because God determined to bless him, but you just think about it. What things are you desperately trying to do now to kind of piece life together and hold things together that in 50 years people will laugh at you like, what were they doing? This is not the proper place of our trust, right? We can't look. I'm not saying don't be diligent and don't do all that you know what to do. Whatever it is that looks like it will work, try that. Hope that it succeeds. But your hope's got to be in God. You've got to be looking to say, like Jacob, whenever it does succeed, you don't say, well, it was because of all the plans I made and I did everything just perfectly. Instead, you say, God did this. Right? Imagine if Jacob would have said, well, it was all the peel and bark that I did. It's like God would have, he's inviting God's judgment now. Don't say that. That wasn't the way. It wasn't because of that. God did this. And he says, he gives honor to God. Our ingenuity is often misguided. The better thing to do, Jacob isn't rebuked here, but he's not really commended either. The better thing, the more safe, the more righteous route would have just been to trust God, to act honorably, to go ahead and try to build up the flock of Laban like a good shepherd, a good hired shepherd would, serve his master well. Try to do that and just take whatever God does as your payment as payment. And not try to manipulate the situation. That would have been better. It would have been more honorable. Jacob isn't necessarily a model for us here in every aspect. He's not rebuked directly, but rather the point of the text is to demonstrate God's trustworthiness and God's faithfulness. God's ability to straightforwardly fulfill what we so complicate in our dealings with people. Now, I have one more real application here, but before I get to that, I told you there's some connections I want to make with some other texts, and I want to just briefly do that for you. I don't think I'll really even turn there. I'll just remind you of things that are said. You can fairly draw a connection between Jacob's desire to return to the promised land and Laban's refusal to let him go because of the wealth that having Jacob serve him produced. He didn't want to lose all that. He had it well. He had it good with Jacob serving him. God was blessing him because of Jacob. So he didn't want to let him go. And whatever time he spent there, he kind of changed things all the time so that they were harder on Jacob and better for Laban, right? I hope this is sounding familiar to those of you who are biblically literate. I mean, the Christians in the room, I hope, and then some of you kids as you're learning more about the Bible. This is so much like the Exodus, right? You've got the people of God there in slavery, serving the Egyptians, right? God tells Moses, go get them out of there. I'll be with you, right? Moses goes and says, God says, let his people go. Let him go serve him. He wants to go to let him go serve him in the wilderness. And Pharaoh says, no, I'm not going to let him go. Because their whole society was built on the backs of slaves. You're not going to let them go. You keep them. And just like Laban's refusal was met by God, what happened? God took everything, all the things that Laban cared about, the reasons he wouldn't let him go, namely his great wealth, and took it from him and gave it to Jacob. And the same thing happened with the people of Israel. Pharaoh was not, they built this great society. Pharaoh was not willing to let the people of Israel go because of all, what that would mean for the crumbling of their society. It would mean that, and also would mean the loss of all their great riches. But what happens? By the time it's over, they've lost everything, the Egyptians have, and what riches, material possessions they have left, they give to the Israelites and say, take it, get out of here, go. And it's almost, the text doesn't say this explicitly, I don't remember, but it's almost like an appeasement, like please, I mean, they were happy to get rid of them. They wanted their favor. Just take this and go with our blessing, sort of. Just go quickly. Right? This was the idea. And they had everything. They plundered the Egyptians. Just like God plundered Laban, so God plundered the Egyptians. In judgment upon the people who would not let God's people go and not deal with them fairly. And God promised this. Those that curse you, I will curse. It's what we should expect. When we see people setting themselves at odds against the people of God, whether that be Old Covenant or New, we ought to expect that they're inviting judgment upon themselves. We may see it immediately. We may see it in 20 years. We may not see it till the judgment, but it's coming. God has promised. Right? It's coming. That curse is either going to fall on them, and we'll see it, or it fell on Christ, and they'll be pardoned for all those sins as they come to know the Lord. Like it's one way or the other. Like there's a curse coming. So that's just a connection to be made. I think it's really helpful as we read this story. Now, I have 4 passages I want to turn to, all kind of, or 3 passages, sorry, I want to turn to, all kind of making the same point. They're in Psalms and Proverbs in light of this story. So let's go first to Proverbs chapter 5. Proverbs chapter 5 and verse 22. We can start in 21. I think it'd be fine. It'd go a long ways to making this point. For a man's ways are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his paths. The iniquities of the wicked ensnare him, and he is held fast in the cords of his sin. Right, here's Laban. It's his own iniquities that provide, it's his own sinful schemes that provide the opportunity for Jacob to take advantage of him. Right? And then he keeps changing the wages. Oh, and that'll be, from now on, you'll only get the striped ones. Well, he shouldn't have said that, Laban, because guess what? God's going to work it out. There's only the striped ones now. And because you said it, you don't get them. And then he comes and he says, well, actually, we're going to change it. I'm going to take some of these striped ones now. You only get the spotted ones now. Well, guess what? It's only going to be the spotted ones. Like, no matter what he does, God is working it out where he's confounded by his plans. All of his wicked schemes, they ensnare him. And the reason, I mean, no matter how he sees it working out, and he says, well, we'll change it, and now I will change the rules, and now it'll work out in my favor. Kids, pay attention to that, right? You play games with other kids. Oh, the new rules now. Wait, new rule. This way I'll win. Like, it's not going to work out that way. You'll see. Don't keep changing the rules. God sees that, right? God saw Laban changing the rules all the time. And God kept confounding and kept opposing him. I mean, if you could set up the rules for commerce in your town in ways that you guaranteed they would benefit you, and then they never did, you would wonder. You should wonder, why is God opposing me? Well, it's because you're wicked, that's why. The iniquities of the wicked ensnare him, and he's held fast in the cords of his sin. So then the other two are in Psalms. So Psalm 10, verse 2. Psalm 10 and verse 2. In arrogance, the wicked hotly pursue the poor. Here's a prayer now. Let them be caught in the schemes that they have devised. So they're devising schemes to ensnare the poor. And the psalmist says, let them be caught in the schemes that they devised, in the schemes that they have devised. And we see it. This is happening for Laban. He's scheming to rob Jacob of his rightful pay, and instead he gets everything taken from him. You see it. Psalm 141, verse 10, last text. Psalm 141 and verse 10. Another prayer, petition, this time of David. Let the wicked fall into their own nets while I pass by safely. Right? Because they're trying to trap him. He said, Lord, let it come upon their own head. Let them fall into their traps while I pass by safely. Right? This is exactly what happened for Jacob. He passed through all these 6 years safely, abundantly. God was with him. The same blessing, the abundance that came to Laban because of Jacob, now that Laban has set himself against Jacob again, God just doesn't let Laban have it. He just gives it to Jacob. It's amazing. So we see that. So that's really all I have today, those applications from this story. Again, God is outperforming your hopes. He's faithful in all that He's promised. In the midst of working things out for us, He's also meting out justice for those that deserve it. Our ingenuity is often misguided. The better and safer route is to trust God and act honorably. Thank God for His care and provision. Be kind to others, not be self-interested. Jacob's not a model for us here, but he is a foil to demonstrate God's faithfulness and trustworthiness. We see the connections between the way that Laban treated Jacob and the way Egypt treated Israel. There's lessons to be drawn there. And then this whole thing about God really answering prayers of His people to judge the wicked, to judge those who work against them. No, and maybe final thing just to say is just to remind ourselves of Matthew 6:33, right? Seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. It's not up to us. The Lord will work these things out. And He's more than able. He's faithful. He's good to do it. We have a good Father. So that's it. Are there questions or comments on any of this today?